Now, he was right on the button. As well as I could make out the time, he stuck to his 40 minutes. Thank you, Medford. That was wonderful. And another thing, thank you for standing up for my beloved Mississippi. And he is exactly right. The letters, oh, I wish you could share with me the letters that I get from all over the United States saying, we know what you're going through. Keep your chin up. We're praying for you. We hope that you'll be the victors in the end. And they say, don't worry too much about the image of Mississippi. It's strictly okay. Now, this next man who is going to speak to us was not known to me before yesterday. Of course, I knew him through the press, as you did. You read about his fight for his own business. And that makes him a man very dear to my heart, because, as you know, I'm that woman rebel who sawed the padlock off the door when the Social Security experts tried to make me pay. So I love people with the courage of their convictions, and I feel that this man is one who is indeed a person who has the courage of his convictions. He has wept, and I have wept with him, as I am sure you have, over the destruction of a precious liberty. He's going to tell you about that, but I'm going to tell you just a little bit about him. He is a native of Atlanta. He is married, and they have 4 children and 2 grandchildren. He began his career with the Atlantic Steel Company at the magnificent sum of $10 a week. And that was good money, I imagine, back in that day, wasn't it, Lester? Wonderful money. And then he went into the Navy Department of the Bell Aircraft in the engineering department. He's a Baptist, and of course after that he got into the Pickrick. He wanted a business of his own, and for 17 years he owned and operated the Pickrick in Atlanta. And I wish you'd go out to dinner with this man. He wipes every cup, he wipes every knife and fork, he checks everything, he has a comment to offer on every bit of the service. He knows whether it's good or bad. He's a born restaurateur. Is that the right word for it? Anyway, he knows his business. Actually, in addition to that, he is a Baptist, a Mason, a Moose, a Civitan, a member of the Georgia State Chamber of Commerce. He is a strong supporter of the Boy Scouts of America, and at one time he belonged to the Restaurant Association in Atlanta and in the United States, but since they did not see fit to uphold him, he withdrew his support from them, and he is no longer a member. I count it a real privilege to introduce to you this man who is the subject of controversy all over the nation. Does a man have the right to control what is his own? Mr. Lester Maddox of Atlanta, Georgia.
Thank you, Mrs. King. My good friend, and your good friend, Dr. Evans, who it's been my pleasure to be with on so many occasions, and Colonel Bunker, ladies and gentlemen, those sponsors of the meeting here, members of the Birch Society, any beatniks that may be present, and some of my dear friends, Dr. Stelling and my neighbor over here, from right on my own street, Mrs. Autry in Atlanta, some of our friends from Savannah, and others of you. It's a real pleasure that you have bestowed upon me to be in your presence today. I never had really intended coming to Boston, to New York, to Chicago, to San Francisco, but Mr. Johnson, the communists, and the government have placed me among the unemployed without workman's compensation or job insurance. You know, Dr. Evans, I really appreciated what the press said about Dr. Evans in Chicago. He's a deep thinker. He's an intellectual. He thinks on his own. He studies. He knows what he speaks. Where the only criticism they offered of Dr. Evans, they couldn't understand why he was associated with people like us. And he's a great man, and he's done a fine job, and we appreciate Mississippi. We hope more people will begin to appreciate that Mississippi has in the forefront of the fight and has been for years. And it's the state government where they've decided they're going to do away with all state government. If they're successful there, then Massachusetts could be next. You know, and invited me up to here to this great city. It's known throughout the world because of what you have done in the years past, in the centuries past, to make a great land and to bring freedom to not only Americans, but to freedom everywhere. I feel like I've gained something that I couldn't have gotten anywhere else, and I think I'm going to go back to Atlanta and to Georgia and to other parts of the country, possibly more inspired and more determined to make more effort than I've ever made before. And I hope that you'll do the same from this meeting. You know, and inviting me to speak here, you have honored me, and you've discriminated against a lot of other people that would like to be here, and I appreciate it, and I hope you can always discriminate. Reminds me, back when I used to be in the restaurant business, something that we loved and something that was ours. All of it was ours until the communists said they wanted it. And Lyndon Johnson said, all right, if you boys want it and you'll give me your boats, you can have it. So a fellow walked into our restaurant earlier this year, back when I still had a key to my door, the building I had constructed and everything, and it was snowing just a little bit outside. I know you people know what snow looks like. A lot of us down south don't know too much about it. And he says, Rick says, what do you think about all that white stuff out there? And I said, well, if it gives me half much trouble as some of this black stuff has, I'm going to have some trouble. But let me hasten to add that the people who fight us and oppose us use the racial insult, the racial issue, to attack and destroy America. It's only the channel, the travel, the road that they're using to take away the freedom and liberty of all Americans, regardless of race, creed, color, or national origin. I'm glad that the Birch Society is doing the great job that it is. I go into Marion, I go into Tampa, I go into Chicago, I go into St. Louis, I go into Shreveport. Wherever I go, I see Birch coordinators working. Now, I understand now why the communists are so blastingly in their efforts to damn the Birch Society, because the Birch Society is the strongest threat to communism in America today. I've got a whole lot to say. If you're going to do that, you're going to take some of her time, because I'm not going to relinquish any of mine. You know, Dr. Stelling will tell you, some of our other people will tell you, that Mr. Bob Welch came to Atlanta several years ago, and they canceled out the meeting hall and wouldn't let him speak. And I know how he felt about it, because I've had them canceled out on me. But they couldn't have a meeting. The Birch people were the founder of the Birch Society in Atlanta. Dr. Stelling, some of them called me, and they said, where can we get Bob Welch to meet? He's coming to Atlanta. They've canceled out our meeting places. We can't find the hall anywhere. I said, I'll get my church. We got our church 3 hours before meeting time. We didn't have a meeting hall. We had over 700 people in attendance. So even though I'm not a member of the Birch Society, I support it. I just didn't want to label you with my liability. And so I want you to remember this. Of all the speakers present, of all those who followed you the past 2 years, of all those who may follow in the next years if we're able to continue to have meetings, and that is questionable and doubtful, you'll never have one that comes before you's been sued as many times as I have. I've got 2 suits pending now with the federal government. Before they're answered and through with, I'll probably have 2 more. Now, I attended last year. They wanted to have an unpledged electors meeting in Atlanta and Georgia, and I attended it. And I knew what they were trying to get at, to get a conservative on one of the tickets, and I advised them when I got there. I said, I'm glad to speak, but I said, I'm not a Democrat for Goldwater. I said, I'm an American against Johnson because Johnson is against me, and he's against you. Don't you ever forget that. And he's against Negro Americans and white Americans. And I was sued for that. And a few days later, after they found out we were going to have a so-called conservative, probably a conservative on one of the tickets, they decided that they'd have a Goldwater, a Democrats for Goldwater meeting, and they asked me to speak again. And I did. And I said, I'm not here as a Democrat for Goldwater. I'm here as an American against Johnson because Johnson is against me. And the next day I was sued again for misusing the word Democrat. I've had as many as 3 sets of federal marshals in my place in one day. I've had them in my home. I've had the FBI to stay at my place of business for 7 months, not because they wanted to, but because the dictator said they had to. So I may have some other suits. Remember this, every time I go into court, what you believe in and what you love goes into court. Sure, I've lost a lot, and they said, I read in the paper where I'm supposed to say, what is my speech today? What's it supposed to be?
The title of it?
Yes, ma'am.
It happened to me.
It happened to me. It didn't. It happened to you, and it happened to everybody in this country. Not just me, what's happened. It's happened to everybody to some degree. Not just to white people, not just to colored people, but to poor people, and rich people, and young people, and old people, and all people who love their liberty. What has happened to me has happened to all Americans to some degree. I am unemployed. I don't have any job insurance. I don't have any surplus food. I don't have any workman's compensation, and I don't want any of it, do you? You know where I would like to be? There's some of them complaining because I'm here, you know. And I wouldn't want to come if they didn't, because I couldn't do any good. But I'd like to be in my business that I used to have with my wife and my children, and paying my bills and having a bank account and being free to go home or take the key and unlock my door. That's where I'd like to be. So let me tell you people who object to my presence in Boston that I didn't say nothing when Mrs. Mrs. Peabody came down south and I didn't say nothing when little Bobby came parading through our town several times. I think I made a mistake in not doing it, though. And I don't think that I'll ever stop talking again about what I know is to be right, whether they like it in Boston or Atlanta or New York or California or Mississippi. I'm going to speak out for what I know to be right, for what your rally is supposed to be for God and country. You know, I heard a number of times, and I know you have, that we can't be half free and half slave. And we can't. But I don't like the way it's going to where we're going to be all slave. Do you, Doctor? No, sir, we can't be half slave and half free. We've got to be free. All of us have got to be. And I'm not here to fight your city hall of mine or the White House. I'm here to defend myself from these who would destroy our liberty. Speaking of civil rights, all the civil rights movements who are supposed to be benefiting the Negro, they're not working for him, they're working against him. Spent $5 million last year, the 4 major civil rights movements, for agitation, destruction, and ruin. And the government spent millions behind them. And the news media spent untold millions to support them, and the pulpit along with them. And they haven't built one factory, one plant, one nice restaurant, one nice cafeteria. They haven't done anything for the Negro or the white America. It's a money-making, communistic thing to divide this nation. They're using this issue to give us government by threat, by intimidation, and by force. Government today in our nation's capital is filled with more hate, more prejudice than has ever been known to man. Talk about bigots. No wonder they turn out some of the lights in the White House. They couldn't face the truth and the facts. Let me tell you about these public officials. I'm not satisfied. Public officials, not even the business leaders or the business community, when they compromise and appease, away the liberty and freedom of all Americans. No, I say I won't be satisfied nor stop my fight until we turn back the renegades who would sell us out. It's time to quit being cowards. It is time to quit letting others do the job. I'm fed up, not with good chicken. I'm fed up with cowards, particularly among the business community, businessmen who should be. I'm sure I belong to the Georgia State Chamber of Commerce, the Atlanta State Chamber of Commerce, Atlanta Chamber of Commerce, the United States Chamber of Commerce, the Independent Merchants Business Associations, many of these associations, and not one of them in America anywhere has said, we're going to help you. We realize that you're fighting for all America. Businessmen will come up in there, grab you around the neck and shake your hand, put your arms around you and say, I'm 100% for you. I want to help you. You're on the right track. Boy, we're really behind you. But don't say anything because I'm in business. And I'm fed up with people like that. It's time to, you hear a lot about tolerance. It's time to be intolerant. It's time to be intolerant to communism, to ungodly, bloody, deadly communism. It's time to be intolerant to crime and immorality. It's time to be intolerant to things that destroy liberty and freedom. I heard it explained here today, and I somewhat disagree that we're not extremists. Well, I am. You be whatever you want to. I'm extremely concerned about this thing. I'm so extreme about it that I lost my business and my life savings. And I'm disturbed when businessmen who have gained so much from the American free enterprise system won't spend $1 to save their own children and their own neck. And I say this to you here today. If you're in business, you've benefited probably more from the American free enterprise than any other area, any other people of America. You've got an obligation. If you're not doing your part, then you're failing your God and your America and your people. My fight and your fight, and Martin Luther King's fight, and Ralph McGill's fight, and L.B. Johnson's fight shouldn't be racial. It should be for God, and it should be for liberty, and it should be for survival. And that's what mine is. And I wish they would change and get on the same fight and quit helping sell out this country and this America. Listen, if we were all Negroes, including Lester Maddox, I would wage the fight that I wage today. I feel like that my fight is not for just my children, it's for your children. It's for Reverend Ward's children. It's for Martin Luther King's children. It's for Lyndon Johnson's children. That this fight is for the liberty of all Americans. And you can call me a segregationist if you will, and I don't object. And you'll pick up your newspaper and you'll find that segregationist Lester Maddox was in your town. Maybe. And you'll hear it over the radio and television. And I don't mind. I'm glad I am. You know, but they wouldn't put in that newspaper integrationist LBJ, would they? They wouldn't dare. They wouldn't put in there integrationist Ivan Allen of Atlanta. So I say to the news media, and I do appreciate the presence of those here today, that if you're going to call one fellow on one side one name, you ought to call his opposite something else. I know it's hard to be fair, but you ought to do it. But I'm not blaming the press, because I know the time's coming when we're going to take over and we're going to turn this nation back to states' rights and back to free enterprise and back to constitutional government, and then all you in the news media are going to be on our side, and we know it. Yeah. You know why I lost my business, really? Because I'm white. If I'd had the blessing of being born a colored man and I'd gone into the restaurant business, wouldn't nobody put me out of business. So I've been discriminated against. What's happened to me, I hope will never happen to you. I hope it'll not happen to your children and your grandchildren. I hope there won't know everybody come along and close up your building and take the keys to your door and lock your business that you spent your life at. And that's the reason I'm in Boston. Sure, we could talk about urban renewal, which is a confiscation of the property of the American people, destructive of liberty. We could talk about the war on poverty, which is not a war on poverty, it's a war on freedom. Talk about the war on poverty. You know, the greatest war ever waged on poverty was when we formed the American free enterprise system, one nation under God in America. You know, the American free enterprise system wiped out more need and more poverty and more want and more hardship and more hunger, more struggle, more hardship, all than anything ever that's happened on any land, anywhere in the history of the world. And if we wipe out the American free enterprise system, we're going to have either more poverty or all slavery. You can't be half free and half slave. We could talk about crime, fluoridation, the loss of city, county, and state government. Even your Boston City Council here wouldn't dare make a decision that they didn't think first was approved by Washington. Did you know that? You don't have any city government. We don't have one in Atlanta. Some of them say, I picked up the Globe paper today, and it's this guy, Whitney Young, or whatever his name is. You know, I found out I'm wrong in being in Boston because he says there's no more communists. They're all gone. Did you read it today? An editorial column on the editorial page by Whitney Young. It's all a mistake. You know the reason they can't see the communists? They're looking on the bed and they need to look in the darn thing. Or in the mirror. You know, speaking about communism, how many of you, I'd like to see your hands, think we're going to win a war in Vietnam? Raise them up high, please. Did you see any? How many of you think our purpose in Vietnam is to win the war? How many of you think our purpose in Vietnam is to fight communism? Our purpose in Vietnam, if we were going to fight communism, we could fight them in Boston, in Washington, in Atlanta. We wanted to fight communism. It's a farce and a sham. You know who got us over in Vietnam? Russia. I don't know where they told us to go, or we went to them first and got the approval. Oh, maybe it is funny, but I bet you it's the truth. We're going to kind of finally keep on until we provoke maybe China into a war with us. We're either going to run then, or we're going to get a hold of the bomb, and we're going to wipe out the bombing capacity of the Chinese. And if anything's left, maybe Russia will join up with us. If we look like we've been knocked down pretty low ourselves, she'll crawl on us, then it'll all be over. And we're supposed to be fighting communism in Vietnam. I'll never forget, Southeast Asia last year when the Maddox destroyer was struck by the communists. The United States fought back and fired back at the communists. When the Maddox was struck in Atlanta, they joined the communists. All about the same time. We're not fighting communism. President Johnson says he knows it's there, but he don't want to be called a red baiter. He's failing to be president when he knows that this country is threatened with communism and he fails to take a stand against it. We could tell you about how Selma was planned, and you know it was planned in 1956 by the communists. They would use the churches. They would pick out a certain county. In 1965, they would create enough of racial strife that the voters' rights bill that they already had drawn would be presented to the United States Congress and passed in 1965 on the anniversary of the assassination of President Lincoln. Planned and printed and published in 1956 in America. We could tell you further about some of the other conditions existing. And let me hurriedly here mention some of the conditions that I think are most harmful to our country when we speak about communism and the things that are destroying states' rights and individualism. And I think greater threat to our country is the National Council of Churches. They have gone down in the Mississippi and leased a piece of property. I believe it's in Edwards, Mount Beulah College, isn't it, Dr. Evans? And they're taking contributions from the churchgoers of America and hiring instructors. I think a man and his wife from Boston, isn't he? A man and his wife from Boston, ministers. And then they're paying these students, they're feeding them and clothing them and giving them a salary to train to be agitators. Did you know that with the National Council funds? And just a few weeks ago, you know who they hired? Miles Horton, the director of the Highlander Folk School. And he's an instructor being paid there on the campus of this communist school being operated by the National Council of Churches in Edwards, Mississippi. So be sure and get your collections in to support the National Council of Churches if you want to hurry up complete washout of America. I did mention crime, and you know what that is. You know, I want to mention, though, where it's caused, what's brought it on. Moderation. Building an image. Being progressive. Ignoring the truth. And the same group that has brought on our civil rights problem and hasn't helped the Negro or the white is the same group that is trying to render ineffective law enforcement in this country. And so shortly, because of this horrifying crime rate increase, they can step in and say, your local police can't help it, can't do any good, so the national government's going to take over. That's the purpose of the whole thing. We have major crime. We have police officers slain in Macon in the police station the other day. We had a police chief at Swanee, just out of Atlanta, that was slain because he stopped one of LBJ's boys because he was speeding. We had a police officer in Mississippi with about the same time that some agitators were in Selma, and one of them had met a tragic death. We had a police officer in Mississippi had his head almost blown off with a shotgun. A few days later, another one killed with a rifle. Yes, we had just this last few days here, you know, in New York, a young boy went to the store with his dad and he lost his life. And I watched the national network and they gave 3 minutes to a minister who lost his job in Selma, and not 1 second to a boy who lost his life in New York. Yes, we'll fly airplanes all over the country if a civil rights worker messes up or gets messed up. For every civil rights worker who's lost his life, has been 1,000 Americans of others not in that movement who have lost life, liberty, and property, and been injured and robbed. And yet all this goes on, death all across America. Women, children, business places. The president hasn't sent any messages, hasn't sent any star jets. Humpty Dumpty hadn't been down there to attend any of the funerals. You know what's happened in the subways? You know the 9 students that were stabbed at a basketball game in Detroit? You know that some of the churches are being locked in Washington, D.C. and still bars put across them? You know the United Nations that the women employees have to have armed escorts to their parking lot? The United States Supreme Court building, the government has to buy a new expensive piece of property to get a parking lot closer to the building so the ladies can get to their cars without being attacked or killed or mauled. All across America we have this, and it's brought about by President Lyndon Johnson, by your liberal news media, by the cowardly businessmen, by the minister who has changed from God to a social salvation. And they're responsible for this crime wave that is destroying this great land. And we are responsible for not taking a greater stand than we have. Now, hurriedly, I'll tell you about our start in business with $4. I used to, as a young boy, 8, 10, 12 years old, go in and out of stores, and I'd say, boy, I wished I could get behind that counter. I wished I had something like that. If I ever get any money, I'm going to do it. And I started selling newspapers in Atlanta, the old Georgian American. They would sell for 3 cents a piece, and they cost us 2 cents, doctor. And I'd make a penny every time I'd sell one downtown Atlanta. Occasionally someone come along and give me a nickel, and I must have been a bank director, or he didn't know what he handed me one. But all through life, back even when it was so cold, we'd have to go out, didn't have any fire in the house, and we'd have to go out and get something to start the fire with, and then we didn't have anything to eat. We'd have to go out to the hen's nest and get something to cook for breakfast. We didn't mind, we didn't object, not even when Dad went to the community chest, and said, well, I got 7 children at home, and me and my wife, and we're all ragged, we're all hungry, we're all cold, can you help us? And they said no. Many times they said no, no, no. They never did say yes. We didn't complain. No, because someday, being in a free America, one nation under God. What about it? One nation under God with a free enterprise system. Even being hungry and ragged, it gave you an opportunity. It reminds me about the man that went to Lyndon Johnson, and he said to him, says, Mr. President, aren't you the man that was born in the log cabin? He says, no, says, you got me mistaken, says that was Mr. Lincoln, says, I was born in a manger. But you know what I continue to say all the time, that someday I could have me a business. Sure, you didn't have to have any money. Some say somehow, because it was free. Sure, I was barefooted. Put pasteboard in my shoes to keep the cold out in the mornings, or as much of the water as I could, and no lunch. We had lunch for a while. We had 2 pieces of bread, and finally didn't have the bread to jam together. We call them jam sandwiches to start with because we jam them together. See? But finally we didn't have any bread, no socks, no clothes. Quit school, but that wasn't bad, was it? Because we were free. Wasn't it wonderful, a free America? Private property rights. So we did get started. We started with $4 in an old pigeon house, ran the pigeons out and washed it out. Started selling sewing machine thread and Vaseline salve and ice cream and hamburgers without place, even without running water. Because we had an opportunity in America. Continued to work. Then along come the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And I knew they wasn't going to pass that because Mr. Johnson said it would make a police state out of America. He said he'd always fought it and he always would. He hoped nothing like that would ever come to the United States Senate again. And then things began to happen in Atlanta. First we were picketed by some 41 of them one day, and I didn't mind because they'd been going everywhere else but to our place. And I felt like they were discriminating against me. And they unloaded out there one day, and there was 41 of them out of 5 taxi cabs, and I knew they were coming because there was about 80 photographers and reporters there first. And one of the reporters walked up from Life or somewhere like that. Said, Mr. Mice, you got any comments? I said, yes, it's getting awful dark out here. And it was. And I asked them, I sent the NAACP a wire after they quit picketing, and I said, please send them back. I said, they sure did help business. I said, it's the first thing you've ever done that I like. I said, in fact, if you don't send me some more, I'm going to hire some more, and that'll cause a little inflation. And I said, there's 2 things I'm against. One of them's inflation, you know what the other one is. But they never did come back for a long time, and then they began to come in, create trouble. They told me before they came from Leb's restaurant, where they used his dining room floors for the restroom, right in the presence of police officers and the news media. Men and women, white and black, get right out on the floor in the restaurant. They told me theirs. Says, we got him now, and we're going to get you next. And you won't have any business left, or no money, or no home. Well, I still have my home. It's more on it than it's ever been before, but it's still mine as of today. And they told me they were going to do that. So when I got a call at 5:30 this afternoon, July the 3rd, it'll be 1 year since they invaded our property that particular time. I got a call from my manager about 4 o'clock, and he says, there's 4 reverends out here. Just left. They wanted to see you. From the Interdenominational Theological Seminary. And I told them you were not in. They said, well, we're not surprised he's running from us, and we'll be back. We'll be back at 5:30. So I was called, told that they were coming back. I'd never worn a gun in my life, and this is something you've never heard before. I'd never fired a gun in my life. I bought one early 1964 because of all the crime. Restaurant people, other business people, and homes being burglarized, all the things that were happening. But after they had told me they were going to destroy my business, then they gave me a call that I was running from them. I went back to my business, and at 5:30, with federal government watchdogs and the communists combined, they struck at our property. Something you didn't hear. It was published by the Associated Press, but you didn't get it up in Boston. It was in Tennessee. I got over 1,100 newspaper clippings within a week on that one day, and only one of them quoted that paragraph, that I did not pull my gun until after repeatedly asking them to leave my property. One of them started from his car, and I shoved his door back, and I still didn't pull my gun. But a great big old heavy fella got out the other side and started back toward me and my son. And I did. And the newspaper, Associated Press, told that only after they refused to leave, only after they threatened me, did I pull my gun. And I had the constitutional right to protect my life, liberty, and property. And you know, I've been reading in the paper about everybody's supposed to be equal, and I pulled my equalizer. I did. You know, they asked me in the court, said, why? I said, well, there's a lot of people that haven't been given an opportunity, or they didn't protect their life, liberty, and property, and they're not given the second opportunity. Let me tell you, after this thing happened, the FBI stayed at my place for 7 months. Why, even sometimes when they was parking on the front, me and my wife would park behind and watch them while they watched the restaurant. Yes, a man from Holly Hill, Florida, traded his car to Hub Motor Company in Atlanta, and 2 weeks later someone bought it from Hub and they'd parked it on our parking lot, and the next morning the gentleman from Holly Hill, Florida called me and said the FBI just left his office. A mother in Atlanta who visited her daughter in California drove back a station wagon, parked it on our parking lot. The next day, the FBI was in her home. A man called me from Roanoke, Virginia and said, Mr. Maddox, we were in your place the other day, and the FBI just left my office and told me not to tell you. Yes, they text students all over the campus. They couldn't even get their lessons for the FBI. And they'd go to the North Carolina, South Carolina, Texas, Louisiana, Alabama. The FBI knock on the door and say, this is the FBI, we want to see the driver of this car. And the parents would say, oh my, what has happened? It belongs to our son in Atlanta. A great shock to mother and dad. And they say, well, he's been eating at a place, we want to know why. Now what would be your first thought if my son's going to a place and the FBI is checking on it and says he's gotten into the wrong company? Oh yes, it went on and on and on, and then in the courtroom they testified. One man after the other, FBI men, right across the witness stand. How many cars was on our lot, when they were on our lot, how many people were in the cars, where they were from. And then right behind them, students from New Jersey and New York, in a conspiracy with the United States government, sent into our business to spy and to get information they wanted as to what we served and who we served and when we were open. And this is America, and this thing happened. Yes, they even went to my home. They didn't believe what I was giving the church. They went to the church and came back and said, why did you give so much? And this is America. And I says, none of your business. The Bible says, render unto Caesar what is his, and unto the Lord what is his. And I said, you go back and tell him I'm not going to give him a dime I can have. They even went into my wife sitting at the table and asked her how often she stopped to eat at our restaurant. Even patched a parking space on the parking lot, and they measured it to see if it was a patch or a new parking place that we had. In America, you know what? They didn't want me to ever go to court. They cut our volume $3,000 a week, the government did, hoping that we would fold up without the government forcing us out of business. Oh, I wish you could have been in the courtroom and heard the FBI and the SNCC group and the students from New York and New Jersey testifying in a conspiracy with the communists to destroy your private property rights and mine. And the saddest of it all is that I didn't get a jury trial. You know why? If I'd had a jury trial, I wouldn't be in Boston today. I'd be in my restaurant. The only way they can destroy liberty is wipe out the jury trial, and they have wiped it out. And it must be restored. And Dr. Hess, all of us, Dr. Stelling, all of us have got to do something about it. Did you know who what my property and business, who it belonged to? It didn't belong to Washington or Lyndon Johnson or the communists. Not to you, not to my brothers and sisters, but me and my wife and my children. And my rights and my income and my life savings have been stolen. Now, I didn't go to Washington to get permission to build that building. No, not when I picked up the hammer and saw to put the decking on the roof, or make the loan, or hire the employees, or serve the food. Washington comes back and says, now you've got to forget all of that. Listen, you know, they said I can't do that and you can't do that, but Katzenbach, or whatever kind of back he is, they came into his place and he didn't want them in, and what did he do? He used armed guards to throw them out of the Justice Department. The White House, Lyndon Johnson had some of them, and he didn't want them, and he used armed guards and had them arrested to get them out of there. The United States Capitol Congress didn't want them. They had them arrested. And I have more right. My right as a citizen of America is greater to throw them off of my property. Anybody I don't want. If it's you, I don't care what your color is. If a Negro wants to throw me off of his property, his right is greater. My right is greater to throw people off our property we don't want than it is the President of the United States to throw them out of the White House, or Katzenbach to throw them out of the Justice Department. My time is almost gone. I have a lot of other things I'd like to say, but I know there's other speakers, there's other messages that I would like to give you from Atlanta, but let me say to you, I do have lots of hope, lots of encouragement. From throughout of America, over 15,000 letters, over 10,000 of them coming from out the South, in support of our stand, and not 1 in 100 against that stand. Integrationists from all over America write, if we owned your business, we'd integrate it, but we don't own it, and we defend your right to do what you would with it. Little boys and girls, high school and college students throughout America recognize that this is a fight for the liberty of all Americans. And although my time is about gone, I want to mention this to you. There's a photograph in front of the restaurant that we used to own. Don't even have a key to the building anymore. Key to the office, key to the cash register. Lyndon Johnson stole it from me in violation of the commandment, thou shalt not steal. And the Communist Party and the United States Congress, in violation of the United States Constitution, in violation of the commandment that thou shalt not covet which that is thy neighbor's. They are teaching people to covet that which belongs to other Americans. But my real hope comes from students, working men and women across America. And from Boston, Massachusetts, comes one of the greatest messages that I have ever received from any source. And if you'll excuse me and give me that much time, Miss Chairman. Will you, Colonel? I want to read this message from Boston, from Harvard University, in support of our stand. And I have also another one from a Negro businessman in Oregon that wants me to come out there, and he wants to meet me and appreciates what we're doing, but from Harvard. And you must have this message. Now, I have copies of it, a few of them available, more of them at home, and some of them here. Dr. Stelling has some things around that copies I had. And this is from Harvard University, and he says, Dear Mr. Maddox, I would like to express my admiration for your resolute courage in defending your rights as a businessman and a human being during the past days. Unfortunately, as the outcome of your battle has made appallingly clear, the 1964 Civil Rights Act has succeeded in rendering obsolete the precept that a man's right to his property is as inalienable as his right to his liberty and his life. And he goes on, I am adamantly opposed to segregation and any other form of racism and collectivism. However, I realize that anyone who seeks to gain one kind of human right by eliminating segregation, and who undertakes to do so in blind indifference to destruction of other rights, can only defeat his purpose. If men are not free, and listen closely, ladies and gentlemen, please, this is from Harvard University. If men are not free to use and to control the use of that which they have earned and produced, then they do not possess the right of liberty. And without the right of liberty or any right of property, no right of liberty or any right is possible. The glory of this country from its birth was that it recognized all of these rights. But it just doesn't seem like America anymore. Indeed, it isn't the America that served as a refuge for people from countries where the exercise of basic human rights had been made impossible. If the exercise of such rights becomes impossible here, this is from Harvard University, listen to this, if the exercise of such rights becomes impossible here in the United States, where on the globe will human beings be able to seek refuge? Ask yourself that question. Mr. Johnson should ask himself that question. As you summed it up yourself, you as one sole American cannot bear up the whole United States while the mass of your countrymen work to cut away its political and moral foundations. It seems incredible to me that the direct victims of that reprehensible act, your fellow businessmen throughout the nation, rather than rally in defense of your stand, seek ways to comply with their own destruction. But at least you fought. And although you have been defeated and you deserve the highest commendation for your courage in defending the right which, unless he is willing to defend it, no man can be worthy of being called an American. Sincerely, and I'm not going to give you his name, but listen, I have it. I can produce it. I've had several letters from him. Postscript. You may be interested in to know that I am a Negro. Wait just a second. Please. Let's help our fellow Negro Americans who realize that this is a fight for liberty. Let's help Dr. Ward. Let's help Mr. Fuller of Chicago. Let's help Bishop Kyle of California. Let's help Major Robinson of Georgia. All of our Negro leaders who, if given an opportunity, can do more to save America than we can here in our own group. And these are my final statements. Tomorrow is July the 4th. 1776, when there was a lot of people didn't want to sign the paper, and a lot of people in America don't want to sign one now. I'll make a statement. A man got up and said, sink or swim, live or die, survive or perish, I give my hand and my heart to this vote. He says we have to reach forth, and freedom is ours, and I say to you that we just reach forth, and liberty can be restored. And he went on to say, we may rue this day. It may cost treasure, and it may cost blood. This was July the 4th, 1776. He says it will richly compensate for both. And hasn't it? Yes, hasn't it? And it has cost treasure, and it has cost blood. They lost their lives, their wives, their properties, their cattle, their monies, and lots of things. But it is richly compensated for both, and because it has, I'm here in Boston today, and you're here in Boston today, and we need to start all over again with 1776, and tomorrow is the best day in the history of the world to do it.